I am here today to introduce Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer, who really needs no introduction, I think, to this group. But she has been working with SHYFT for the past year, and we are just so thrilled that she's joining us here in between that void of Christmas and New Year's, where we're all just a little bit, kind of up in the air. And given the year that we've had, we're just excited to have Rosemerry introduce to us some poetry and give us some prompts here that we're going to enjoy this afternoon. Before I hand it over, I just wanted to introduce SHYFT at Mile High. We are a nonprofit here in Denver, Colorado. And our mission is to help inspire joy in people using the lens of mindfulness. And one of the ways that we do that is through poetry. And we bring in people like Rosemerry to come in. And so we can all bond over this shared concepts, these universal concepts of, love and transformation and all the things that people have been talking about for ancient times. And we're just so glad to have you here, Rosemerry. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks to everyone for showing up. We'll spend 40 minutes together. I'll recite poems and give lots of writing prompts for you to do your own writing. And at some point in the next 2 days, 24 hours to 2 days, we'll be sending out a link for everybody that or a document, I suppose, that has links to all of the poems that I'll be reading. And also we'll have a link to this video so that you can watch it again if you want. But I would recommend having a piece of paper and a pen or pencil beside you, whatever you like to write with, so that you can just jot down some ideas in case you get a little spark that you can move forward with. So I thought we'd start with a little song, a little invitation, I suppose, by Danny Ladinsky and a version of Rumi. How did the rose ever open its heart, ever open its heart, and give to the world all its beauty? How did the rose ever open its heart and give to the world all its beauty? It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. How did the rose ever open its heart? When Carrie asked if I would be willing to do some kind of a program around this time of year, I thought, yes, because this is one of my favorite things to do, and thank you for joining. It's to celebrate how poetry touches our lives and opens us and creates a doorway for transformation. And I don't think it's too dramatic to say that. I know for a fact how poetry changes our lives. So I have, many poems to share with you today that have moved me, that have transformed me, that have literally taken me where I've started out reading them in one place and they've moved me to another place, a place of possibility, a place of ferocity, a place of tenderness, a place of openness, a place of willing to be human. And I thought I'd start with a little story about one of the times that I really understood the transformative power of poetry. And it was when I was, in my early 20s. And I went to a wedding of a man named Peter Spencer. He was in his 60s, and this was his fourth wife, and they were madly in love. Peter and Becky. And there we were in this beautiful room with all these windows so that we could see the mountains outside, and everybody's happy and the bride is beaming, and the groom's son, Peter's son, gave the first toast. And he said, "Here's to Viagra." And the whole room froze. And the bride her face just melted. And we were all standing there with our glasses up, and we didn't know what to do. And Peter looked at his bride And he raised his champagne glass just a little bit higher, and he says to her, "My love for you is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. My love is like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. As fair thou art, my bonny lass, as deep in love am I. And I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry. Till all the seas gang dry, my love, and rocks melt with the sun. And I will love thee still, my dear, till the sands of time have run." And when Peter was done, we were weeping, all of us, just tears pouring down our faces. Becky was just opened up again. She was beaming again. And I understood two things. One, the incredible power of words and how they change everything about how we engage with the world. "Here's to Viagra," had one response, right? And when Peter started reciting Robert Burns, I realized that poetry transforms a room, and that I better start learning it by heart. And that was the day that I began memorizing poems. I guess I tell that story just as a way to, I think if you're here, you probably know this already, that poetry has this ability to make a shift in us. So I hope that you feel some of these shifts as I share these poems. Also, this quote from Roger Houston: "Poetry urges us to stand once and for all and now in the heart of our own life." And so in these days, as we just move into this new year, when a lot of us are already thinking, it's a natural time of year for us to be considering, how do I meet these coming days? And poetry, my friends, I know for a fact, anytime we sit down to write a poem, it asks us that same question. It doesn't have to be the first day of the year. Any time we sit down with a blank and a curiosity, we open ourselves up to that invitation for transformation. So I'm going to start with a poem from our present poet laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo. She is a member of the Muskogee Nation, and this is Praise the Rain. Praise the rain, the seagull dive, the curl of plant, the raven talk. Praise the hurt, the house slack, the stand of trees, the dignity. Praise the dark, the moon cradle, the sky fall, the bear sleep. Praise the mist, the warrior name, the earth eclipse, the fired leap. Praise the backwards, upward sky, the baby cry, the spirit food. Praise canoe, the fish rush, the hole for frog, the upside down. Praise the day, the cloud cup, the mind flat, forget it all. Praise crazy. Praise sad. Praise the path on which we are led. Praise the roads on earth and water. Praise the eater and the eaten. Praise beginnings. Praise the end. Praise the song and praise the singer. Praise the rain. It brings more rain. Praise the rain. It brings more rain. I chose this one first because I feel as if what Joy Harjo does so incredibly in this poem is she blesses it all of it. I like to call it bless the mess. And I feel like that is part of what poetry helps us to do. It doesn't just choose the most beautiful things, it chooses everything. And I think that's part of the power of this poem, is that it embraces paradox. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, today over and over and over again. My dear friend Jack Mueller used to growl, "Power to the paradox." And I feel like I have that kind of tattooed in me, that willingness to embrace how we hold opposites within us at all times. And poems are a wonderful way to do that. So one idea for you as you are writing is to write a praise poem. It's a very simple poem to write in a way because it's a list. It's just a list of anything that you want to praise, including the things that might be very difficult to praise. That's part of the success, I think, of a poem like this, is that it is willing to step outside of its comfort zone and engage in praise in areas that feel difficult. I want to point out too that this particular poem, I think, really works because it's having a great time with language, like praise, canoe, the fish rush, right? The fish rush. That's so fun to say. The curl of plant, the rave and talk, praise, the hurt, the house slack. It's just this, it's beautiful, right? And then what she does at the end, and this is of course the hardest part about a list poem, is how to end a list poem. And here she says, with a refrain, she gives it a refrain: praise the rain, it brings more rain. Praise the rain, it brings more rain. So you hear how that repetition at the very end really helps bring us in to know that it's the end, but also by praising the rain, it brings more rain, just really celebrating the rainness of rain, which certainly any of us who have lived with drought know. So thank you to Joy Harjo for helping us know how to bless the mess with praise the rain. And I think that really speaks to a lot of where I am right now at the end of 2020, in this time that has been sometimes very difficult to know how to praise. There's been a lot of stuff that's been difficult to handle. There's been a lot of big challenges on all fronts. And so one way we can meet it is the way that Joy Harjo did, by choosing to praise it no matter what. And another way to meet it is by deciding to really be present and face whatever it really is. And that, to that end, bringing us right into the present moment and meeting it instead of running away from it, which is sometimes what I like to do. This is James Cruz, who is my beloved co-host of Stubborn Praise, which SHYFT is also a sponsor for. Thank you so much to Carrie and to Catherine for all you do to make that program happen. And James is also, he lives in Vermont. He is an incredible poet, and also he has two incredible anthologies, one, Healing the Divide, and an upcoming one about love and hope, How to Love the World, and that'll come out in April. And his own fabulous collection, Bluebird. So this is Stay by James Cruz. Stay with this. There is no escape. Though your heart aches and the world's shrunk to the size of these few rooms. Though fear plucks the strings of each nerve, and you want nothing more than to burst free of the casing of your own mind, like a bittersweet berry giving its softer self to overwintering birds. Still, dawnlight breaks blue above the swaying maples, and the space heater kicks on, steaming windows with its warmth, constant breath. Stay with this, and it will pass through like a sudden storm whose sole purpose is to scatter leaves, seeds, and spores, each to find a new home. The wind cuts terribly against the skin of your face as you press on. Remember, it will calm and cease, but not before carrying off all that you no longer need. That's Stay by James Cruz. Wow, what an incredible invitation, I think, to really meet this moment, uncomfortable as it is. And I love the way that he used poetry to write himself that invitation. an invitation for himself, an invitation for anybody who reads it, right? Stay with this. There is no escape. And then the way he ends it, he and I talked about this poem actually a few days ago, and he was saying, I hope that what people really understand about this poem is that by staying with it and this storm happens, that actually has this kind of shedding quality, like it takes away all the stuff that isn't serving us, which I think certainly does come through. I think it's part of my thrill about this poem is the way that it suggests that in one way that we drop off, that we let go the parts of ourselves that aren't serving us anymore, is by staying with the difficult moment. So an invitation, a prompt out of this poem is to think about, what are you staying with right now? What is really difficult? What would you rather push away in this moment? Like so much of the last year. What would you like to push away and write into it? Write yourself into that moment and let yourself meet what you would rather not meet. I want to, excuse me, point out, by the way, sometimes we're not ready to do that. And that's okay. That is on the night when my mom went into the hospital for heart surgery, I wrote a poem about a rubber spatula because that was what I was capable of that night, because I was way too scared to deal with what was happening in that hospital in Chicago. So I want to honor that there is a ripeness to a moment, and maybe you aren't ready to meet all the things that you want to push away. However, and maybe you can meet part of it, just a part of it. You don't have to tackle it all at once with a poem. In fact, no poem will ever tackle it all at once. In some ways, I think the smaller the moment, the better. And it's interesting to me, James's students have said, that they didn't realize that you could write a positive poem. And our friend Danusha Lamaris has said to her students, you don't need to be a motivational speaker. I think the most important thing with any poem that we write is that it's true, that we are touching what is true, that we write what is most authentic. And that may be very uncomfortable, as with this poem, Stay. Here's a poem that helps us to meet that very troubled world and meet what else is in it too. This is Sweetness by Stephen Dunn, who won the Pulitzer back in 2001. Just when it has seemed I couldn't bear one more friend waking with a tumor, one more maniac with a perfect reason, often a sweetness has come and changed nothing in the world except the way I stumbled through it, for a while lost in the ignorance of loving. Someone or something, the world shrunk to mouth size, hand size, and never seeming small. I acknowledge there is no sweetness that doesn't leave a stain, no sweetness that's ever sufficiently sweet. Tonight, a friend called to say his lover was killed in a car he was driving. His voice was low and guttural. He repeated what he needed to repeat. And I repeated the one or two words we have for such grief until we were only speaking in tones. Often, a sweetness comes as if on loan, stays just long enough to make sense of what it means to be alive, then returns to its dark source. As for me, I don't care where it's been or what bitter road it's traveled to come so far, to taste so good. That was Sweetness by Stephen Dunn. And I love these lines in particular. A sweetness has come and changed nothing in the world, except the way I stumbled through it, for a while lost in the ignorance of loving. That's what poetry can do for us. It's not that it changes anything about the world per se, right? The violence is still happening, and the greed is still happening, and anger is still happening, and sorrow is still happening. But he says, what it does change is the way I stumbled through it for a while, lost in the ignorance of loving. And that is what poetry really has to offer us, is a way to move through it. So a prompt from this question, or from this poem: what sweetness is sustaining you now? What sweetness is sustaining you now? I like the way that he says that the world shrinks to something mouth size or hand size. And in fact, any of you who get my poem every day know that last night I wrote a poem that was based on this one. I gave myself this prompt. Excuse me. I gave myself this prompt. I thought, what in this room right now is so beautiful that it's saving me, even though it's quite small, and ended up writing a poem about the Christmas cactus that is like in this incredible, voluptuous blossoming phase right now. What sweetness is sustaining you? Shrink the world, as Stephen Dunn says, shrink the world to something mouth size or hand size, and write about it and think it. Think it. Knowing, of course, that it's not changing anything except the way we move through the world. I think that the truth is, of course, that poems don't change anything, and yet, of course, they do. And that was part of why I think I wanted to share that poem about Peter Spencer and his wedding, and the way that the room was transformed by him reciting that poem. In graduate school, I was a student in English language and linguistics, and we learned speech act theory, which is about how some words actually do something. And for instance, if I said guilty and we were in a court, now you're going to prison. And if I say, I now pronounce you man and wife, now something has happened. So I do think that poems can act on us in this way, that when we let ourselves be in service to the poem, it can guide us. That's what I get out of this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. She's a Palestinian American, and among many other laurels and awards, she is the Young People's Poet Laureate for the Poetry Foundation. This is burning the old year. Letters swallow themselves in seconds. Notes, friends tied to the doorknob, transparent scarlet paper sizzle like moth wings, marry the air. So much of any year is flammable. Lists of vegetables, partial poems, orange swirling flame of days, so little is stone. Where there was something and suddenly isn't, an absence shouts, celebrates, leaves a space. I begin again with the smallest numbers. Quick dance, shuffle of losses and leaves, only the things I didn't do crackle after the blazing dies. That's burning the old year. And I think this poem is such a great invitation for us to consider, what are we ready to let go of? What are we ready to shed? This section that she has, it says, and where there was something and suddenly isn't, an absence shouts, celebrates, leaves a space. I begin again. And I know in myself that how important it is to say goodbye to something so that something new can come in. It's not always very easy to know what those things are that we want to say goodbye to, but that's your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to write a poem considering, what are you ready to let go of? And it could be like Naomi Shihab Nye does in this poem. It could be some very concrete things. For instance, she says lists of vegetables, partial poems. She could, it could be real objects that you are ready to let go of. But when I took this invitation myself, I don't know, last week sometime, I wrote a poem based off of this one, in which I thought about more metaphorical things that I would like to burn off, disappointments, expectations, this little tally that I keep of who says what and when and how. And the energetic things that I would like to release if I could have a bonfire in my mind. So write a poem in which you throw these things into a fire, whether they're real objects or real energies that are holding on to us. I think so far the poems have really mostly been about the personal. And one thing I love about this next poem by Nate Marshall is that it's about a more collective transformation. It's by Nate Marshall, and he's a writer and rapper, educator, editor. And I first read this poem in The Slowdown, which is a poetry blog by Tracy K. Smith, which has been on hiatus since October 31st, and I really miss it. But this poem, Obad for the Whole Hood. Now, an Obad is a morning poem, usually for a lover. In this case, it's for his neighborhood, which we can tell he loves. Obad for the Whole Hood. Today, I offer myself all the small kindnesses. I'm out here with my breath in my body, though it may be stank, and body in my control, though it may be too much or not enough. Today, I offer the whole crib, a jam we ain't heard in a minute, and permission to turn the news down and move a hip like a suggestion to a lover. On this day, I declare the pockmarked street I grew up on a miracle. I declare the bills, even the overdue ones, a blessing. Who knew that we would still be here to see these injustices? How can we measure the disrespect of lack against that precious surprise? Real talk. Today I tell myself truths other than the one that makes me low. I give myself the gift of a joke with the homies. Real talk. Today I stay woke to all the terror, but also to my favorite food or my favorite place or my best hope for our people. And I work to make all my best lives possible. Obad for the Whole Hood by Nate Marshall. I love that the phrase that he repeats in this is real talk, real talk. And I love that that's what he gives us in this poem. And by the way, in his whole collection, finna, which is a word that he made up, I think, to mean Black possibility. And I love that he has a vision for the community and his place in it in this poem. So the invitation, I think, for us as we write our own poems based on that is to think about our community and think about what do we have to offer. I love the part where he says, I give, where is it? Today I offer the whole crib, a jam we ain't heard in a minute, and permission to turn the news down and move a hip like a suggestion to a lover. What permission can you offer to your community? What permission could you give your community to really show up in a new way, to transform? I also love the idea, by the way, of this, where he says, today I tell myself truths other than the one that makes me low. If you were going to write a poem that was real talk, as he says, that was filled with truths other than the ones that make you low. In this poem, he certainly does both, right? He lets us know he's not sugarcoating anything, and yet he is still finding what is the blessing, what is the miracle, side by side with what is painful. This is one of my favorite poems next of all time, partly because I have such a strong, fabulous memory of it. Uh, my dear friend David Lee and I, for many years, taught together in Ohio for poetry high school students at this retreat put together by a fabulous man, Alan Cohen. And we take all these high school students and we go off into the woods. And every time David would recite this poem at some point in our time together. And it's from Bill Holm. The poem is called Advice. Someone dancing inside us has learned only a few steps. Do your work in 4/4 time, the what do you expect waltz. He hasn't noticed yet the woman standing away from the lamp, the one with the black eyes, who knows the rumba and strange steps and jumpy rhythms from the mountains of Bulgaria. If they dance together, something unexpected will happen. If they don't, the next world will be a lot like this one. Gosh, I love that poem. I love that poem. I love also that I hear it in David Lee's voice when I'm reciting it or reading it. But the invitation of this poem is so beautiful, so profound. The idea that whatever it is that we're seeking outside of us can actually be found inside of us, and that there is a partner in us willing to help us make that transition, willing to help us transform. So my question to you, a poem idea, what or who is dancing in you? What inner invitation is waiting for you to meet it? Why aren't you meeting it? What if you did? And what if you don't? What a fun, creative way to create. I just love the way that Bill Holm wrote this poem as a, it's so playful, right? Who is there in you waiting to dance? What is that invitation? I think I'm going to read just one more poem and then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. This is one that I wrote, and I thought we'd end with this one because I'd forgotten about it, but it recently came back to my attention because several of my friends resurrected it, and hearing them read it made me think, oh my goodness, live that poem, live into that poem, Rosemerry. And I think, gosh, isn't that always the invitation for all of us to become the poem? Anyone who's taken a class with me before knows how much I believe in the power of practice and how the writing of the poem, the sitting down to meet the poem, the willingness to serve the poem is way more important than the poem that we write. It isn't about writing a good poem. It's about writing a poem that feels so true that our whole body feels resonant with it. This is Manifesto. And if we can't save the world, and who says we can't, then let us try anyway. Perhaps we have no superhuman powers. Can't see through buildings, can't fly, can't bend the bars of cages, but we have human powers, can listen, can stand up to, can stand up for, can cradle. And if we can't imagine a world of peace, and who says we can't, then let us try anyway. Perhaps we start tonight on a Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. It doesn't much matter the day. All that matters is the choice to meet this moment exactly as it is, with no dream of being anyone else but our flawed and fabulous very self. And then, wholly present, bringing this self to the world, touching again and again what is true. What if we do? And if we can't save ourselves, and who says we can't? let's try anyway. There was a time I thought I could never be healed. That was only because it hadn't happened yet. Healing happened anyway. What have we decided isn't possible? What if we stopped believing that limit? What if right now we used our human powers of compassion, clarity, gratitude, and praise? What if we did it all together? Opened all those closed doors inside us. What if we let the opening do what opening does? Choosing to write a poem is to choose to be willing to be opened. And it's a brave act. It's a courageous act. What if you wrote a manifesto too? What if you wrote the poem that you could hold up as how you want to move through the next moment, the next week, the next year, the next now, quite honestly, is really the hardest to do. Easier to imagine ourselves being glorious some moment in the future, but to imagine ourselves being fully in our power right now. What if you wrote that poem? You know, I often think it's so sad to me the way like we set up these things like, you know, poets against the war, and we're supposed to write poems against war. And of course we're against war, but that just helps reify the war. What if we wrote the poems that envision peace? What if we write the manifesto that envisions exactly how we want things to be? An invitation to ourselves to live into that moment and become that poem. Whew. Well, there we go, friends. Oh my goodness, I didn't save us very much time for a Q&A. Probably about just a handful of minutes. But were there any questions, comments, thoughts? Carrie, have you been monitoring it at all?
I have. It's mostly just praise for you, Rosemerry. Everybody is just loving these poems. There are a few questions about whether people will get a copy of these poems. I'm going to send them as soon as
You
we have
will.
links
Yes,
ready. Let's see. Anybody have any questions for Rosemerry?
I can see lots of very sweet comments coming through. Lots of thank yous. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up and attending. Thanks for jumping in, being willing to play today.
I just saw one. Yeah. What is your muse?
What is your muse? What isn't the muse? I mean, I think that's the blessing of poetry, right? Is that as Mary Oliver says, the world offers itself to your attention over and over. And I feel as if there is everything is muse worthy, is poem worthy. I know it for a fact. In fact, I know it for a fact about everything but ticks, and I still haven't written a tick poem. Still not able to write that one.
I'll write that for you.
I'm trying.
Someone asked if you were going to have any additional classes and workshops in the new year, and I know we have a few that we're planning right now here at SHYFT, but let you talk about all the stuff.
We'll see. I'll do a few for SHYFT, and I have a couple I'm doing for some other organizations. I'm going to do quite a few less. I have a big project that I'm working on. So I'm backing off for a little bit on teaching classes, but it'll all come back. It'll all come back. I'm sure we'll do some more things like this, which is so much fun. I just absolutely love this. And I can't stop. I don't know. I just love the classes we do so much, Carrie. And I want to thank, by the way, Carrie at SHYFT. I want to thank Catherine at SHYFT. It's incredible to me. If I had a dream, it would be that there would be an organization that was so excited to share mindfulness, positiveness, love with the world that they would host a program like this. And my friends, it exists. It's SHYFT. It's just so amazing. It's such a dream come true. I feel so grateful for SHYFT. Thank you so much. If you are unfamiliar with SHYFT, please check out their website, which is SHYFT at Mile High. What is it, Carrie? SHYFT at Mile High?
SHYFT@milehigh.org. I'll include all that in the follow-up email tomorrow, so you can look for one from me, and you can sign up. We have yoga classes, we have meditation classes. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We're everywhere, so we'd love for you to join our community as well. And Rosemerry, thank you so much for all the people that you've brought to us. It's so fun to see so many like-minded souls in this world, and coming together in this way is pretty amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. All right. Well, was there one more question maybe? Did you see any of them? I saw a flood of things come through that I couldn't follow if there were questions.
There were a few in the Q&A. Let's see. Are there poems you recommend memorizing?
Oh, golly. I can tell you that I have several favorite books. In fact, what I'll do is I will send to Carrie my bibliography of my favorite books that include anthologies and individual writers and websites where you can find poems. But by far, my favorite two anthologies are Poetry of Presence, which is done by Ruby Wilson and Phyllis Coldeye, and Healing the Divide, which is done by James Cruz. And both of those are just full of poems that are totally transformative, and I couldn't recommend them enough. And I'm certain that any poem you find in those books that does this to you, that makes you go, ah, that's the poem to learn by heart. And there's an awesome book called Saved by a Poem by Kim Rosen that offers lots of advice about how to go about learning a poem by heart.
I love that. There's just so many friends that we know in here that I'm seeing names. Colette, Amy's here, my Aunt Sue's here. Hi.
We will totally include that list. I will totally include that list with the links to all the poems that you heard today. There's actually one poem I didn't get around to reading to, so that'll be a bonus one from Juan Felipe Herrera. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you. I'm grateful for you. I wish you incredible joy in your writing practice. And thank you for showing up. And thank you, SHYFT.
Bye. Thank you.